For days ago, Alex EALA was just a wild card, a name buried deep in the draw sheet, barely mentioned in tennis conversations. Given an invitation to a tournament with a quiet expectation that she would show up, gain some experience, and disappear before the real contenders took over. That was 4 days ago. Today, after taking down a Queen's Club champion, a Wimbledon champion, and one of the most battle-hardened veterans on tour, the tennis world is suddenly asking a very different question. Did Berlin just witness the emergence of a future Grand Slam champion? At the time, nobody inside that stadium fully grasped what was unfolding. The cameras weren't even focused on her court. The commentary was directed elsewhere. The broadcasters weren't getting her name right. So, what really happened on that grass? How did 3 of the most dangerous women in tennis walk in expecting routine victories, only to leave as if they had seen something they couldn't quite process? And why is it that, even in defeat, this run is now being described as potentially the most significant performance of the entire season? The answer takes a turn you won't expect. This is Tennis Unfiltered. To understand it properly, you first have to understand just how impossible this run was supposed to be. Wildcards in tennis are essentially courtesy invitations. They are handed out based on perceived potential, not because anyone truly expects deep runs or major upsets. The unspoken understanding is always the same. You show up. You gain experience. You maybe steal a match or 2 before quietly exiting once the real contenders take over. That is the role. That is always the role. And Alex EALA arrived in Berlin under exactly those expectations. Low pressure, minimal attention, the kind of invisible status where even broadcasters don't bother getting your name right. But that invisibility was about to become her most dangerous asset. Because no one prepares for a wild card. No one studies her patterns the night before. No one sits in the coaching box with detailed notes on how to break her serve. She enters the court as a question mark. And question marks are the one thing elite players hate most. They expose uncertainty that preparation cannot solve. In the opening round, she faced Donna Vekic, a name that carries real weight on grass. The reigning Queen's Club champion, a proven surface specialist, one of the most dangerous players in the draw on this exact surface. On paper, it was the worst possible first-round matchup for a wild card. Experience, composure, and proven pedigree against raw inexperience and expectation-free freedom. It wasn't just uneven. It wasn't even meant to be competitive. And for the opening games, it played out exactly as expected. The favorite in control. The rhythm pointing toward a routine outcome. But then something subtle began to shift. It started with small moments that didn't look dramatic in isolation. A clean backhand winner down the line. A serve landing with precision rather than desperation. A point constructed with patience instead of panic. For a player who was supposed to be overwhelmed by the occasion, there was an unexpected calm in the way EALA was building her game. No rush. No collapse. Just quiet resistance that slowly started to change the shape of the match. Game by game, the dynamics stopped looking like a mismatch and started feeling like a warning. By the time the final point was played, the scoreboard reflected something no one had written into the script. EALA had won. The reigning Queen's Club champion was out in the very first round. And at that moment, most of the tennis world hadn't even registered it yet. But that silence didn't last long, because waiting in the next round was a very different challenge. Elena Rybakina, a Wimbledon champion with a serve that has dismantled far more experienced players than this. The kind of opponent who doesn't just beat you. She shuts everything down. If Vekic was the test, Rybakina was supposed to be the correction. The point where the story ended. Where reality reasserted itself. Where a wild card's run met the full weight of pedigree, power, and expectation. It wasn't where the story ended. Far from it. Straight sets. Let that sink in. Because straight sets wins against Elena Rybakina don't happen by accident. This wasn't a fluke or a lucky swing of momentum. It was a composed, fearless, and controlled performance against one of the most intimidating servers in the sport. Somewhere during that match, the atmosphere inside the stadium began to shift. The half-empty outer court slowly started to fill. Phones came out. Group chats lit up in real time. People who had never said her name out loud before were suddenly typing it into search bars, trying to understand who she was and how she had just done something like that. Because at that point, this was no longer about luck. This was something else entirely. And the tennis world was starting to realize it. And the unsettling part was that beating Rybakina wasn't even the biggest shock of the week. What came next forced everyone to stop framing Alex EALA as a Cinderella story and start treating her like a genuine threat. Alina Svitolina, a veteran in every sense of the word, a competitor forged through years at the very top of the game. She has built her entire career on breaking rhythm, shutting down momentum, and making young rising players feel the full weight of elite-level tennis. She has ended more dream runs than most players have started. This was the kind of opponent who doesn't just test your game. She tests your nerve, your belief, and your sense of belonging at this level. And for a set, she tried to do exactly that. It looked like, for the first time, the run might finally be reaching its limit. Svitolina pushed, probed, stretched every rally, refused to allow the match to settle into comfort for even a second. Every point had to be earned. Every opening had to be created under pressure. She made sure EALA was constantly operating at the absolute edge of her ability. But what separated this performance from everything that had come before was how she responded. Pressure didn't break her. It sharpened her. Every time Svitolina increased the intensity, EALA matched it. Every time the match threatened to tilt away from her, she found another level that no one had seen from her before. No panic. No visible hesitation. Just adaptation in real time against a player who has spent her entire career exposing inexperience. When it was over, the outcome repeated the same pattern as before. Another elite name. Another statement win. 3 matches. 3 top-tier opponents. 3 victories that had nothing to do with luck and everything to do with something far rarer. Composure that doesn't usually belong to a player in this position at this stage, against this level of opposition. And by now, you could feel the shift inside the stadium. It wasn't passive watching anymore. People were leaning forward, following every point like it mattered beyond just the match. Phones weren't just recording highlights. They were checking the draw, asking who comes next, trying to understand how far this could actually go. The belief wasn't coming from hype anymore. It was coming from evidence. At this point, it wasn't a breakout week or a surprise run. It had become the story of the tournament. The kind of stretch that takes over conversations, floods highlight reels, and reshapes the entire narrative of an event in real time. Alex EALA walked into Berlin as just another name buried deep in the draw sheet. By the time the semi-final arrived, she was the headline. She was the reason fans who don't normally follow grass-court tennis were suddenly tuning in. She was the player every commentator wanted to discuss, every rival was quietly preparing for, and every analyst was now forced to take seriously. More than that, she had become the focal point of the entire tournament, carrying not just her own ambitions, but the attention of an entire country watching from thousands of miles away. And right at the peak of that momentum, when it felt like nothing was left that could realistically slow her down, the draw produced the one opponent capable of disrupting everything. Not because of ranking or reputation alone. Because of history. Linda Noskova. Earlier in the season, Noskova hadn't just beaten EALA. She had controlled her. Completely. Leaving a result that lingered far beyond the final scoreline. The kind of loss that stays in your head. That resurfaces in tight moments. That quietly tests your confidence before the match even begins. And Noskova arrived in Berlin fully aware of that history. Carrying it with her, playing like someone determined to reinforce it. From the opening points, the tone was completely different. There was no slow build or cautious exchange. Noskova came out aggressive, sharp behind her serve, relentless in taking time away, and intent on preventing EALA from settling into the calm, controlled rhythm that had carried her through 3 demanding matches in the same week. Every time EALA looked for space, Noskova closed it. Every attempt to reset the tempo was met with immediate pressure. Every time the crowd rose to its feet sensing another momentum shift, another moment of escape, Noskova responded immediately, dragging the match back under her control. And that is what made it so difficult to absorb, even in hindsight. Because even in defeat, Alex EALA never stopped competing. Not once. She chased down balls that looked unreachable, rebuilt points that seemed lost, kept searching for solutions from the first game to the last. That fight, that absolute refusal to fold, was the same quality that had carried her past Vekic, past Rybakina, and past Svitolina. But this time, against this opponent on this day, the answers simply stopped appearing. The match gradually slipped away, point by point, until the run that had taken over the entire tournament finally came to an end. One step short of the final. The cruelest part wasn't the loss itself. It was how close everything suddenly felt. For the first time all week, the final wasn't some distant possibility. It was right there, visible, almost tangible. That proximity is what made the ending hit harder than expected, because it stopped feeling like an abstract dream and started feeling like something that had almost been reached. And if the story ended there, it would be easy to frame it as nothing more than a promising run that fell just short. A feel-good tournament week with a disappointing finish. But that version misses the point entirely. It reduces everything to a scoreboard. And that scoreboard doesn't explain what actually unfolded in Berlin. Because the Real story was never just about results. It was about what those results revealed. A wild card given the lowest expectations who walked into a draw nobody was watching and somehow forced the entire tennis world to stop and pay attention. Someone nobody outside her own circle believed could make a serious run walked through a Queen's Club champion, a Wimbledon champion, and one of the most battle-tested veterans on the entire tour. Not over a season. Not over a long stretch of time. In a single week. That is the kind of performance that doesn't just win matches. It announces a player in the loudest possible way. It declares, without a single word, that she belongs exactly where she stood. For years, the conversation around Alex EALA has been built around potential. Future star. Rising talent. Someone to watch eventually someday down the line. That word, eventually, has followed her everywhere. Berlin stripped it away. You don't beat a Wimbledon champion in straight sets and still get labeled as just a prospect. You don't take down 3 top-tier opponents in succession and remain a maybe. Berlin wasn't a glimpse of what she might become in the future. It was evidence of what she already is in the present. And that shift in perception is what makes this so significant. Not just for her, but for everyone else on tour. Because now the field isn't dealing with an unknown anymore. They are dealing with someone who has already shown she can dismantle elite opposition in the biggest moments of her young career. And that is where things get uncomfortable. Because the part nobody says out loud is this. Players don't come out of weeks like this smaller. They come out bigger. Belief is one of the rarest and most dangerous assets in elite sport. You can train technique. You can refine tactics. You can build fitness. But belief is different. Once a player proves it to themselves at this level, it doesn't stay contained. It spreads. You can drill serves for hours every single day, refine every detail, and repeat patterns until they become second nature. But you cannot manufacture the feeling of knowing, without hesitation, that you have already beaten the best players in the world. Because you have actually done it. That kind of belief doesn't fade. It compounds. It resurfaces months later in a tiebreak that no one expects you to win. It shows up in the way a player walks onto court for a warm-up against a name that once felt untouchable. Belief is invisible until the exact moment it isn't. And then it changes everything. So yes, this loss hurts. It should hurt. Falling one match short of a final after a run like that carries its own kind of weight. The kind that lingers long after the crowd has left and the cameras have moved on. But every great career has a chapter like this. Not defined by a trophy, but by a revelation. A week where a player stops questioning whether they belong among the elite and instead experiences it directly, in real time, against the very players who define that level. Years from now, when this stretch is looked back on, there is a strong chance the defining moment won't be the semi-final defeat. It will be the week everything shifted. The week a wild card stopped being an afterthought and became a real problem for the entire tour. Because what comes next isn't a question anymore. Wimbledon. The biggest stage grass court tennis has to offer. Arriving just weeks after this exact run. And the entire landscape looks completely different from what it was before Berlin even began. Before this week, opponents saw a wild card. An inexperienced name they didn't need to over-prepare for. A player they could afford to underestimate. That version of Alex EALA doesn't exist anymore. Now they see the player who eliminated a Queen's Club champion. The player who dismantled a Wimbledon champion in straight sets. The player who pushed a battle-hardened veteran to her absolute limit and came within reach of a WTA 500 final on the exact same surface that will define the next major. That is no longer someone you overlook. That is someone you scout. Someone you plan for. Someone who changes the entire shape of a draw just by being in it. Alex EALA leaves Berlin without the trophy, but arguably with something far more dangerous. Belief. The kind of belief that doesn't sit quietly. It grows. It carries into the next tournament, into the next tight set, into the next moment where pressure decides everything. When a player discovers they can beat champions, they stop entering tournaments hoping to compete. They start entering expecting to win. The scoreboard from the semi-final will always show Linda Noskova as the winner. That result doesn't change. But results only tell part of the story. They don't show what a match takes out of one player, or what it unlocks in another. Berlin didn't just produce a deep run. It produced proof. Proof that Alex EALA belongs at this level. Proof that elite opponents are not untouchable. Proof that the gap between potential and reality is far smaller than anyone outside her circle believed. The trophy went elsewhere. But the attention didn't. A week ago, she arrived as a wild card. She leaves as a problem every contender on tour now has to account for. And if this was only the beginning, then Wimbledon may be where the rest of the sport fully catches up to what Berlin already revealed. Alex EALA is no longer just the future of tennis. She is already part of its present. This is Tennis Unfiltered. If this week moved you, if you have been watching every point from thousands of miles away and feeling every single moment of it, subscribe and tell us in the comments. What do you expect from her at Wimbledon? We will see you there.